Here's a portion of recent information. The Trump Organization, as in the 500 business entities primarily devoted to property management and resorts, the one our very honest president has refused to divest himself from, but swears he is no longer involved in, even though we have to totally take his word on that. The one run by his two sons, Eric and Don Jr., who have totally sworn to stay out of politics, but are also really into politics, according to their father, the president. Anyway, that Trump Organization isn't doing all that great. Like, it's not completely tanking or anything, but according to his 2018 financial disclosure, Trump's company that he owns, but totally doesn't involve himself in, actually saw a loss since he became president. And that makes sense. Regardless of how good or bad your actual brand is, we've traditionally seen that companies don't tend to do very well when their spokesperson is, racist. Also, putting children in camps isn't exactly a stellar business stunt. Under most conditions. The exception we'll get to later. Also, all the other terrible things Trump has said and done in the last few years. All bad for business. So if you only saw these headlines about the company's losses, you might see it as a confirmation that Trump is indeed not using his position as top America guy to make some extra cheddar on the side. He's sacrificing his wealth for the good of the country. And hey, look. His company even claimed to donate any of the profits from foreign, and only foreign, interests, giving a grand total of $151,470 that they have internally calculated with no oversight. Surely that's not something a bunch of ethics lawyers would point out is insane. This is all very normal, is my point, and I can't see whatever's here, so I'm just gonna keep on going. But even if, and that's a big ol' if, the Trump Organization is honest in reporting this loss, it isn't for a lack of unscrupulous trying. Trump is absolutely using the presidency to boost his business, both directly and indirectly. The RNC and his own campaign committee are paying Trump hotels for fundraising, because the location and brand is obviously now associated with the Republican Party, and will continue to be long after this presidency. The Trump Victory and Trump Make America Great Again committee have spent over $1 million at Trump's properties since he became president. Meanwhile, his business saw a 26% rise in profit from dignitaries, embassies, and other foreign government spending in the last year. Meanwhile, scores of Republicans, lobbyists, and CEOs vying for access have expensive memberships to golf clubs Trump likes to visit, the one he owns, and charges his own Secret Service to operate at, which they pay for with somebody's money. So despite the business itself going a tad downhill, Trump himself is absolutely using his presidency to make money from his private business, who he remains the sole beneficiary of, which is absolutely unconstitutional. This is both frightening and it's kind of hilarious, because ultimately our corrupt president's plan to abuse and profit from being the leader of the free world is centered completely around a real estate grift and like online merch. Like again, he's definitely making a lot of money, but not nearly as much as a smarter corrupt person could, because he's using the presidency to sell witch hunt beer cozies. That is not a Photoshop. That is an actual thing you can buy in his official store. Hey ladies, buy this $55 Trump swimsuit and you could be the sexiest dame at the country club, provided you don't have blood coming out of your wherever. My point here is that yes, Donald Trump is obviously profiting from being president and should be held accountable. But he also sucks at business and is very obvious about his misdeeds. Which is why it's important to ask this very serious question. Who is profiting off of Trump's presidency that isn't a total dummy dumb fart brain dummaroo? Specifically, who in Trump's orbit is using their position to gain power and make profit? Because honestly, what else would they be doing? Trying to make a difference? Do you think any of them, many of which were terribly vetted before barely lasting a year or two, are in it to make a difference in the world? Do you think that? Let's dive right into this, immediately pushing through the family itself, aka the lesser Trumps. I don't want to spend too much time on them because we all kind of know exactly what they are. Obviously, you have Eric and Don Jr., those scraps, who are the ones officially running the Trump Organization, while also doing totally unrelated family activities like dining with the Queen while owning resorts in the UK. Overall, their shadiness is pretty unsurprising and exactly what you'd expect. And it sure seems like the public is catching on to this and taking the appropriate actions. With the Trump fam, the main grift is all real estate nonsense on a sliding scale of how good each family member is at making money. Clearly the top dogs are Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, who collectively made somewhere between $28 million and $135 million last year, other estimates saying at least $82 million. This was seemingly from various investments, Ivanka's personal brand, stake in Trump hotels, and Kushner's family real estate company. Again, this is all pretty straightforward for anyone who has already accepted the reality of having a president who doubles as the patriarch for a family of stereotypical 80s movie villains. But then we have that quiet little Jared, who certainly isn't a dumb fart brain dumbaroo. Jared, the man tasked by our president to, amongst many other projects, bring peace to the Middle East, apparently via this weird vapid real estate brochure. Well, he owns a $25 million stake in the real estate investment firm Cadre, a company he was the co-founder of, but failed to publicly disclose for, some reason. Anywho, this company that he failed to disclose his connection to recently took advantage of opportunity zones, which is a tax incentive to develop in low-income communities. It's not a bad idea that was part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, something Ivanka, who Jared knows, was extremely supportive of. But that's not too terrible, right? Which is why I probably shouldn't have led with it, and instead mentioned that Cadre also received $90 million from anonymous offshore investors since 2017 via Goldman Sachs. Some definitely from Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I probably should have led with that instead. Probably should have led with stuff where the guy hired to oversee foreign policies tried to hide his stake in a company receiving mystery millions from various foreign interests. That seems like the thing I should have led with. And even though it feels like we should spend hours talking about Kushner and Trump's family and dig into all the ways they are profiting off of their power, we need to move on, because there are a lot of other sneaky Pete's to get to, which is why we're going to primarily focus on the biggest and most funnest grifters, like how the Oscars tried to shove all the technical awards into their commercial breaks. They aren't any less important, but sometimes you just have to trim things down for time. Sometimes. Next up, Elaine Chao, the United States Secretary of Transportation, is one half of the power couple between herself and the partially deflated dirt manatee that is Mitch McConnell, aka Chao, Mitch-Lane, Elaine Chao. What is a fun nickname we can give them? How about Gravedigger of Democracy and millionaire using her government connections to help her family business? That works. That works perfectly. See, Elaine isn't new to serving on the U.S. cabinet, having previously served as U.S. Secretary of Labor for the entirety of the George W. Bush administration, where she left a legacy of neglecting to regulate workplace safety and wage law, often siding with businesses over workers, which is not shocking, considering that her father, James Chao, runs a large shipping company out of New York City. This makes her a pretty shady pick for both Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Transportation, otherwise known as the two things she has been. If you're one for keeping up, Elaine made recent headlines when it came to light that she had failed to cut her ties from Vulcan Materials, a construction company directly affected by Chao's decisions as head of the Department of Transportation. Having previously served 2 years on the board of directors, Chao was given $151,000 in stock options that she had agreed to receive a cash payout for as part of her ethics agreement from when she was hired. This is a thing she did, not do. And during her time as Transportation Secretary under Trump, the guy in charge of infrastructure policy directly affecting Vulcan Materials, this stock has risen by 20%. But hey, at least this particular corruption is also an incentive to fix our infrastructure, or at least Kentucky's infrastructure, where Chao directed grants of at least $78 million through a special liaison given to no other state that she assigned during Mitch McConnell's re-election. Mitch being a guy she knows. Mitch is also the guy who blocked a larger infrastructure plan earlier in the year because it was too expensive and it didn't personally help his political goals. Of course, haven't we all used our jobs to help out a family member or friend? Like a hilariously unqualified family member or friend? Like given a really important job to a family member or friend despite them having no experience with that job? Yes, meet Gordon Hartogensis, husband of Elaine Chao's sister and recently confirmed director of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, an agency that handles roughly $100 billion in assets. Congratulations, Gordon! According to his LinkedIn page, before being put in charge of nearly 1,000 employees, he managed the family trust. So, solid pick. Because Elaine Chao, who has received $26 million in gifts from her family's company, sure likes to help her family company, which builds its ships in state-owned shipyards in China using a state-owned steelmaker, primarily does business with China, and has generally close ties to China since the 1980s, China being the place that is currently expanding its maritime presence, as opposed to the dying shipping industry here in the US, an industry that Mrs. Chao's Department of Transportation has been cutting the budget of, eliminating grants to small commercial shipyards and scaling back training for American crew members. Meanwhile, her family has paid for scholarships and training programs in China. This is all according to a piece by the New York Times, the main story being that Chao used the Department of Transportation to make travel arrangements for her family members to attend business meetings in China. But after ethics concerns were brought up regarding the fact that her family was not, in fact, part of the Department of Transportation, Chao canceled the trip, like the totally not guilty person she is. Here she is, not guiltily, doing interviews with her father about his business while Department of Transportation flags hang in the background, which again, he is not a part of, and is in fact a businessman whose company is directly affected by the Department of Transportation. Solid ethics, Chow Pham. Ah, geez! Who else can we talk about? There's a lot of them, most of which involve personal favors or misuse of taxpayer money. In a lot of these cases, we're talking about people who are already rich, faced with a conflict of interest, and secretly refuse to sell stock despite doing so would make them even richer in order to illegally keep the stock so that they could be even richer than even richer. Like, that's seriously the ethical question most of these people failed. But for the most part, none of this is that different than politicians before them. But there are some standouts. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross accidentally left off stock holdings from his 2018 financial disclosure form. Holdings he had agreed to sell, specifically 100 shares of Bank United stock, by the Commerce Secretary. He also hosted a meeting with Chevron executives despite his wife owning a $250,000 stake in the company. He also met with the CEO of Boeing, a company his wife also owns a stake in, this time for $2 million. And also many, many more, including possible insider trading. Nice work, Wilbur. The millionaire Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, began her job with over 100 potential conflicts of interest, including ties to a student debt collection agency, which coincidentally was later given a big contract with the Education Department after she took the job. Total coincidence. DeVos also refused to give up the millions she and her husband have invested in a rip-off brain pill company called NeuroCore, which specifically targets kids with ADHD. Fun aside, DeVos was also listed for over a decade as the VP of the Edgar and Elsa Prince Foundation, an organization that gave millions of sweet hate bucks to anti-LGBT causes. When confronted about this 13-year position, DeVos insisted that it was merely a clerical error. That's what she said. And then there's Scott Pruitt, former EPA head, who spent $4.6 million in taxpayer money just on personal security. He also used aides like personal assistants, spent $100,000 on a trip to Morocco just because he wanted to go there, soundproofed his office, racked up $100,000 in first-class travel, used top EPA officials to help with a personal dispute with a landlord, and made a subordinate help his wife find a job at Chick-fil-A. Never before has such a power been squandered to live like an Instagram celebrity. Who the f*** else? What about that Steve Mnuchin guy? The Treasury Secretary is surprisingly involved in the goddamn film industry, successfully producing countless movies you've probably seen. And while that's mostly a violation of good taste, it's interesting to note that Mnuchin is one of the lead trade negotiators with China and currently pushing the country to give the American film industry greater access to their markets. something that would directly profit him. Now, that's pretty tasty, and kind of the perfect way to make money from the screeching catastrophe that is Trump's administration. Because, assuming he doesn't, you know, go to jail or anything first, Mnuchin is working to better an occupation unrelated to the success of Trump. You know, you gotta get in. You gotta grab what you can and get out of there. Like a real Rex Tillerson walking away with a massive tax break. Or that lovable scamp/millionaire Carl Icahn, a special advisor to Trump who wasn't given an official federal job and then used his ethically loose position to try and push the EPA to change specific policies to help his business before quitting when people started asking too many questions. But not before selling a bunch of steel-related shares mere days before Trump announced steel tariffs. That's weird. It's like someone, I don't know, gave him information from the inside. Or you could be one of them Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke's, using taxpayer resources to secure a personal land deal before fucking right off, just as the inquiries got started, claiming that he just couldn't justify spending money to defend himself against these false allegations. You know, like a real innocent person worth several $1 million would do. Replacing Zinke was Deputy Secretary of the Interior David Bernhardt, a former oil and gas lobbyist whose firm had donated nearly $1 million to the senators who voted on his confirmation. Like, that's how he began the job. While acting as deputy, Bernhardt made at least 15 policy changes that directly benefited his former clients. At least we think they are former, because it turns out that Bernhardt lied about stopping his lobbying work after Trump picked him for the job, which makes sense because it's not like he ever stopped representing his clients. For example, he spent his lobbying years representing farmers attempting to weaken the Endangered Species Act before becoming deputy secretary and personally finishing the job, going so far as to block a report about the dangers that certain heavily used pesticides have on wildlife. He has so many conflicts of interest that he apparently keeps a list of them in his pocket to remember. But I'm sure these are all innocent coincidences and he's not getting any money from his former clients, which is why his office regularly omits meetings from his schedule. Good God! He better be making money, because otherwise he's just hate fucking the environment for the fun of it. Like, it's starting to seem like when Trump said he was going to drain the swamp, he actually just meant that he's going to damage a lot of fragile ecosystems. My goodness. We haven't even talked about John Kelly, adult in the room and former Secretary of Homeland Security turned White House Chief of Staff, turned into a man clearly betting that hell doesn't exist, because before he became Secretary of Homeland Security and then Chief of Staff for Trump, he was on the board of DC Capital Partners, owner of Caliburn International, which runs the Homestead facility, the largest and only for-profit child detention centers. As Secretary of Homeland Security, he proposed separating undocumented children from their parents as a form of deterrent against immigration, effectively filling up the camps run by the company whose board he used to sit on, and upon leaving the White House, John Kelly, the adult in the room, joined the board of Caliburn, the company that profits off packing for-profit detention centers with migrant children forcibly separated from their families, a policy which John Kelly, the guy we've been talking about, proposed. So that's just a little f***ed up, I guess is my point. We did another episode about it. Check it out. It's, can't stress this enough, really f***ed up he did that and is getting away with it. So, how do we top that, huh? Who is left in Trump's circle to talk about? Who actually gained the most, both financially and in terms of power and status?
The next Vice President of the United States, Governor Mike Pence. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Pence, you fiend! Could it be you? In terms of illegal accumulation of wealth, this seemingly innocent VP isn't on the top of the list of pillagers. I mean, yes, if you're wondering, one of Pence's biggest supporters and personal hometown friends is a guy named Anthony Moravec, owner of a pharmaceutical company called BlairX Laboratories, who immediately had lunch with Pence after the VP pick, who has also donated $250,000 to Pence's campaign. And I don't know, maybe that has something to do with his administration suddenly dropping their vow to lower drug prices. I don't know. I can't see everything that's happening in the world. But again, I'm not talking about the accumulation of wealth. I'm talking about this 2017 New Yorker article that features an interview with the VP's brother, Gregory Pence, who says this about the election. If he lost, he had no money, and he had 3 kids in college. He took out student loans for the kids. He's got a retirement account, but I was afraid he'd run out of money in just a couple of weeks. He'd have to get a job. He was rolling the dice. And while this is just one guy, albeit a family member, saying this, you can look up Pence's financial disclosures from 2016 and see that not only did he only have 1 bank account, but less than $15,000 in it, as well as 7 student loans for each of his kids. And this makes a lot of sense when you look into his background, and the fact that he once lost an election after using campaign funds to pay off his mortgage, like some kind of desperate cheater would do. And after that, he hosted a shitty political talk show where he spewed conservative talking points no different than some kind of possibly even more terrible Crowder.
We spent a good amount of time this week talking about the case of the Air Force versus Kelly Flynn. We did so touching on a variety of issues. Early in the week, we talked about whether or not it was time to rethink this whole business of women in the military.
Yeah, trust me and my radio voice, and now I talk differently because I'm the vice president. And clearly a man on the right side of history, he was. The point is, when Trump picked him as VP, Mike Pence was in trouble. He was a broke politician and former conservative huckster, and it actually makes a lot more sense why he would go along with the nomination when it was literally his only hope for a job at the time. And since then, his net worth has risen to $2 million. That is a chilling comeback for someone who, quite frankly, sucks a bunch. But if you wanted to know who gained the most from this ghastly clown show of the last few years, you now know that thing. Congratulations. And if you're wondering, he's 38 years old in that video. So go ahead and take a good long look at Ben Shapiro, or heck, even yours truly, because we might be vice president someday. You're welcome for that thought. Co-vice presidents. Vice presidents. Wow! End to that video. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe and leave comments, and check out our patreon.com/somemorenews and our podcast called Even More News. This is the end of this part of the video, which is the end of the whole thing.